All right, everyone's still smarting over that loss at Florida State, I should say, on Wednesday night. Not a good night for Pitt, and even though it's Friday, we're still thinking a lot about that, and I suspect we'll be thinking a lot about it heading into tomorrow's game against Clemson, which is going to be every bit the challenge that Florida State was and Louisville was, if not more so, because Clemson looks pretty good. And that's going to be a tough one for Pitt for sure. We'll have a lot to say about that game after it happens. We'll have our, on our Monday morning edition of the Morning Pitt. But for now, we've got our mailbag, because that's always a nice way to end the week. Everybody's feeling pretty crummy right now. The weather is freezing. It's pretty miserable out there, at least in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania. And I imagine where most of you are if you live in the Northeast. You got that. You got 3 basketball losses in a row. It's not like anything's really going well for sports in Pittsburgh right now. So I understand if everybody's kind of down in the dumps, but what could make you feel better than a mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt? So let's do it. Let's jump into some comments or jump into some questions from the Pitt fans on Panther-Lair.com. Questions about Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, transfer portal, everything like that. We're diving into it all. We're taking your questions right here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I always say it's my favorite day of the week, and not just because it's Friday. I think Friday is probably everybody's favorite day of the week, and that's certainly the case for me for a lot of reasons. We probably share a lot of those reasons, but one reason I love Friday is because it's the Morning Pitt Mailbag. I always like doing these. I would say it's like a way for me to I don't want to say take the day off, but I don't have to think of a topic. You guys decide the topics. You guys ask the questions, and I answer as many as we can over the course of our 20 or 25 minutes here. And so I really enjoy that. I like that the questions get asked, and I can just kind of answer the questions. It gives me a sense of what you guys want to talk about, what's on your mind. And so I always look forward to doing these. They're a little bit easier, but at the same time, I do go through and, we do some research and try and have some data and some stats if need be for some of these questions. And there's a couple like that today. There are every week. And so I really appreciate it. Remember, if you want to be part of the Morning Pitt Mailbag, if you have a question, you listen to these Friday episodes of the Morning Pitt and you have a question, you say, hey, man, I really want to ask a question. Well, the way to do it is to go to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the place you can post your questions, because every Tuesday or so, this week it was a little bit later than that, but usually around Tuesday, we'll put up a post, start a new thread, taking questions for the mailbag. You post your question in that thread, and we'll answer as many as we can right here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag. So that's how you can be a part of it. And of course, what we always ask you to do is like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. All right. We got some great questions this week. We actually had a few left over last week that we didn't have time to get to. So I kind of want to start with those and pick up there, because there were some good questions last week that we ran out of time. You remember the last question we had was, what's the store where Pitt shops, proverbially speaking, in the transfer portal? Not Neiman Marcus or Macy's, Walmart, IKEA, blah, blah, blah. I gave an impassioned plea for Aldi, not just as the perfect metaphor here, but also just as a great place to shop. And it's funny because we ended up having a long conversation about grocery stores on the message board this week with news of Wegmans coming to Cranberry, which I, for one, am very excited about. But we answered that question. That kind of took up the end of our mailbag last week, so we'll wrap up with some questions that came in after that one, starting with Potter County native, who says, is Pitt still involved with any quarterbacks in the portal? Not that we need anyone pressing Eli, but a serviceable game manager. If Eli goes down, does Julian Duggar have the game from what we saw to get us through Eli's absence? So I don't really have any clear picture. I haven't seen any clear indications of quarterbacks in the transfer portal that Pitt is connected to. I think they're probably still working on a few guys overall, most likely offensive linemen, because that's what they need the most. But I think the pickings are rather slim at this point in the portal, with just really kind of running low. You're basically looking at next week is the add drop deadline. It's probably the last and rather firm cutoff point for when guys need to be enrolled. And so you're really short on time, at least for the winter transfer portal additions. There might be an opportunity to get guys after spring camp, but for right now, it doesn't really look like they're involved with anyone. Now, there could always be some surprises. They could bring some guys in for, over the weekend for a visit and end up landing a transfer. But at this point, we don't really see anybody on the horizon. And I'll be honest, if there was anything if there were any positive signs that came out of Detroit, if there was anything from the Game Above Sports Bowl that you came out of it and said, all right, I feel better about this element of the team than I did going into that game, it's Julian Duggar. I mean, Duggar was, Duggar before he threw the pick six was well on his way to being player of the game in that one. I really think he would have gotten player of the game if he had not thrown that pick six, or even if he had thrown it and Pitt still held on to win. If he had gotten the snap on 4th and 1 or 4th and goal from the 1 and scored in overtime and won the game, I think Julian Duggar probably would have been the MVP. And he should have been. I mean, Desmond Reed deserved it too. He played his tail off. But I really think that, Duggar was that good. And no, they didn't ask him to do a lot. They mostly asked him to run. But I think for Duggar to be that effective, to be as effective as he was, even in a limited role or a limited capacity, whatever it may be, for him to be as effective as he was still as a true freshman, I absolutely would believe in him going into next year as the backup after a second spring camp and a second training camp. He'll have 2 spring camps, 2 training camps, and a full season that he went through. I would absolutely trust him as the backup quarterback. I mean, you obviously, there are certain expectations you have for a backup quarterback. It's someone you want to be able to run the offense, somebody who can step in, not lose games for you, and potentially give you a chance to win. I think Duggar can do that. I believe Duggar can do that, and I think he convinced me. Maybe he didn't convince anyone else, but I do think because they have Eli Holstein back and because Julian Duggar showed some really promising signs, I think that greatly lessened the need for a quarterback in the transfer portal, to the point where I don't think Pitt was really inclined to use any resources, hardly at all, in terms of NIL and the NIL budget on a quarterback, because it didn't make sense. You have Eli Holstein coming back, and there's a decent amount committed to him, and you have Julian Duggar coming back. And so we saw them connected to a couple quarterbacks. They offered Cole Gonzalez, who was Cade Bell's quarterback at Western Carolina. I think in that instance, they were pretty much hoping that Gonzalez would come here just for the relationship with Cade Bell. You really were not in position to invest much resources, nor should you, because you have bigger needs. You have your quarterback, you have your starting quarterback, and I think you have a pretty competent and effective backup quarterback. You didn't really need to spend a lot of money on getting another quarterback out of the portal. Hail to Knowledge says, what's your favorite storyline from The Wire? I won't spend too much time. I could spend a lot of time on this. We could talk about this for a very long time. I'm a huge season 2 fan. Not a lot of people like season 2. I think season 2 is greatly underrated. I love the storyline with the docs. It's a whole area really of the world that I was not familiar with at all. I like when shows do that, create a world that's just completely separate from what my experience is, whether it's something sort of sci-fi like Silo, or it's something real world like The Wire, a whole area that I have no idea that this whole ecosystem exists of working the docks. And so I really like that storyline, but the season 4 is the one that gets me the most. The schools, I did not expect to like it at all. I don't think kids are good in movies and TV shows, particularly if you try and give them a serious dramatic role, but I thought those kids did an awesome job in season 4, and that remains, that's probably my favorite season of The Wire, so I guess that would be my favorite storyline. But I like the docs a lot. SV Pig 1 says, who is Pitt's left tackle in 2025? Given what they've gotten out of the transfer portal, it's going to be Ryan Baer. They brought in Kendall Stanley from Charlotte. He's a right tackle. He's played right tackle his whole career. You could move him to left tackle, but chances are they won't. I would suspect that they'll keep him at right tackle, and Baer will hold on to that left tackle job that he took over after Branson Taylor got hurt. So Pitt's left tackle in 2025, I think it's Ryan Baer. Jay Leisinger says, who ultimately decides on who Pitt is going to play, meaning what level of competition in the out of conference? I'm tired of having to play all these Power 4 teams when it clearly doesn't matter for rankings, playoff, or otherwise. I mean, ultimately the decisions on the scheduling, it comes down to a collaborative effort between the athletic department leadership and the football program leadership. I don't think I don't think it's entirely Pat Narduzzi's decision, but I also don't think he is not, how would I say this? I don't think his input is ignored. I think his input is very much considered. And so he's not going out and scheduling these things on his own. The athletic director or director of athletics is heavily involved, but it's a collaborative process in putting these things together. As to the scheduling itself, look, I think I've been on this side of it for a long time, on this side of the opinion for a long time, and I continue to be, that when it comes down to it, Stack wins. Stack wins. Unless it's Notre Dame, Penn State, or West Virginia, and not necessarily in that order, you don't get a whole lot out of playing Power 4 conference opponents. And all you get out of playing those teams is the fun of the rivalries, the home field attendance, and that's about it. You get exciting rivalry games, which are going to fill the seats, but that's about all you get out of those games. And games against Tennessee, Wisconsin, Oklahoma State, whoever else they have, UCF, you don't get anything out of these games. And there's fans who will say, well, I want to see Pitt play good opponents. Okay, I get it. You want to see Pitt beat good opponents. I think it's better for Pitt to have as many wins as they can possibly manage, because ultimately Pitt is not in a position where they are going to, where their resume is going to matter. Right? I think if Pitt is looking at a college football playoff spot, it's because they won the ACC and got themselves in that way. The resume, I think Pitt and a lot of programs are very far away from having their resume and strength of schedule really matter at all. I think if you are, if you're scheduling for a power conference team, and you schedule non-conference games against teams from other power conferences, you're doing it for one of two reasons, or maybe both. One, to pad your resume. Two, to fill the seats, right? Like I said, Pitt is not really in a position where their resume matters. And if they are, again, if they're in that college football playoff conversation, it's only because they've won the ACC. I don't see them getting themselves to 11-1 or something like that and missing the ACC championship. No, their resume doesn't matter. You need to stack wins. And teams like, Tennessee put a decent amount of fans in the stands. They brought a lot of people. It's not like Pittsburgh sports fans or Pitt fans really responded all that much to that game. Nobody came to see them play Oklahoma State in 2017. I don't really know what the crowds for Wisconsin are going to be. Although, is that a Pitt home game that got moved? I don't know. But none of UCF, Cincinnati, nobody's coming out to watch these games. So you're not getting people in the seats. All you're doing is potentially taking a loss. You're increasing the likelihood of a loss by playing a more talented team, tougher competition. So stack wins. FCS, 2 group of 5 teams, and then ideally Penn State, West Virginia, or Notre Dame. Stack wins. It's going to be far more relevant down the road if you can look down and see that Pitt won 10 games in a season or 9 games in a season or 11 games in a season than to look down and see that they won 8 games, but they played Wisconsin and West Virginia and Tennessee all in the same year. No, don't do that. You don't get anything out of it. There's no benefit to that. Not right now, at least. Zenmeister 1992 says, do you foresee any adjustments in 2025 outside of ideally a better offensive line performance to try to keep Eli healthier in there? It seemed like he missed every single one of their losses or part of it, so it makes me feel like keeping him healthy in 2025 will go a long way to getting back to what they did well early on in the season. Any adjustments to try to keep Eli healthier? I think you're probably talking about keeping extra guys into block. You're trying to, you're talking about keeping guys, chipping with tight ends and things like that. And they really didn't do much of it. And I wonder if, I wonder if that'll be an adjustment for 2025, if they'll try to augment the blocking and supplement the blocking schemes with more work from the tight ends and the running backs. They didn't really do it this year, and maybe it's just not part of Cade Bell's offense. But you do, if you are not going to be able to protect with the offensive line, if you're not going to be able to protect with just 5, then you need to bring extra help. You need to bring extra help. Now, I think they were able to create some positive situations or advantageous situations by spreading out the offense, 4 receivers spread out wide, sometimes empty sets. And, it was like, oh, you're just leaving your offensive line on an island. But as teams started adjusting and not really blitzing as much against Eli Holstein, First of all, they were able to still get pressure only rushing 4. But second of all, when they were dropping into coverage, when they were dropping 7 or 8 guys into coverage, it was working as well because Eli Holstein wasn't processing that well and the offense wasn't well designed to beat those situations. So there are a lot of things I think that need to be adjusted. I think adding some blocking help would be a good thing. But I also think adjusting the scheme of the offense to adjust to how defenses adjusted. How defenses starting defending Eli Holstein in those last few games before he got hurt. Particularly the Cal game is one that stands out the most. A good portion of the Cincinnati game as well. To only rush 3, only rush 4, drop into coverage and make him pick you apart, make him read the coverage. Well, the offense has to adjust for that as well. The offensive scheme. Eli Holstein has to grow, but the offensive scheme has to get better additionally. So there are adjustments needed. Do I foresee them? Or, I couldn't say if I really know. But things have to change and be improved. And so that actually leads into our next question from Smedges. Year 2 of the Cade Bell offense and the coaching staff is underway. So which areas do you project the most improvement? Interesting question. I honestly, if I was going to go position by position, let's do it that way. Not really run or pass or deep ball, short stuff, screens, whatever. Position by position, I would say you'll get the most improvement this year out of the quarterback position. I think Eli Holstein, and we forget this because it was early in the season, but he was really good. He was really good, particularly in the first 5 games. Not perfect, and certainly had his struggles within those 5 games, but he was really good overall in those first 5 games. Cal game was a tough one for him. Syracuse game was just a weird one, never really got started. SMU game didn't really go so hot. He didn't play another full game after that. So 7-1 as a starter. Pitt was 7-1 in games where I shouldn't say 7-1 as a starter because he started the Louisville game as well. So 7-2 as a starter. I guess he started the Virginia game. So 7-3 as a starter. But games where Eli Holstein played the full game, 7-1 was Pitt's record. Eli Holstein, I think, was pretty good and showed a lot of promising signs. I expect him to take a pretty big step into year 2. He should take a pretty big step into year 2. Here's a guy who had never played, and he goes out and plays a lot of games as a redshirt freshman as a starting quarterback. I think he gained a lot of valuable experience out of that, and I think he should be ready for a big step forward in 2025. So, that's the position I'm looking at more than any sort of specific thing. I think there are a lot of improvements and adjustments Bell needs to make. I think, obviously, the offensive line has to get a lot better. We'll find out about the receivers and tight ends. I think the running backs I think Desmond Reed will be really good again. But I think Eli Holstein is where the biggest jump is going to come, where the biggest improvement is going to happen this season. Pitt 1975 says, as a diehard Pitt fan whose teams are currently struggling, how does one stay optimistic? NIL has taken the fun out of recruiting and maintaining a team that could be good for a couple of years. I'm sure the coaches are tongue-in-cheek when asked about how they plan to keep their teams together year to year. When we see a light at tunnel's end, the transfer portal opens and changes everything. Concerned about the future of college sports that I knew and loved for many years. So, yeah, I get it. I understand. I get it. I think it's tough. Okay. And I know that NIL has made things tough. I know that the transfer portal has made it has changed the foundation of what this sport is. But I think if you are looking for reasons for optimism, and I can always find these things. I don't know why. I need to apply this more to my life of finding the silver linings and being optimistic, finding those optimistic signs. But if you want to be optimistic about Pitt, okay, you're talking about it's hard to keep a team together. Well, I would look at it this year and say they really didn't lose too many impact guys. Sincere Edwards was the big one. Rylan Gandy was a starter. And you lost those 2 guys, but they really didn't lose impact guys. And it's not because nobody wanted them. They held on to guys who would have been very valuable and very profitable on the open market in the transfer portal. Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Kenny Johnson, Desmond Reed they brought back. I mean, like, these were guys who could have gotten something and gotten a lot of something in the transfer portal, but Pitt was able to bring them back along with a lot of the guys they've grown and developed. I mean, like Biles, Lewis, Johnson, these were homegrown guys. These were guys that they recruited and brought up. Francis Brew and Jasir Whittington held on to those guys. And so I think that's encouraging. And as we know, and we've said it a lot of times about football and basketball, a lot of these guys, maybe all of them, could have gotten more money in the transfer portal than they got to stay at Pitt, which says a few things. Primarily, it says something about the culture at Pitt, that guys want to be here and guys want to stay here. And I think that's important, that they're willing to take that hometown discount to continue playing for Pitt. And that goes for Pat Narduzzi, and that goes for Jeff Capel. I think that is a reason for optimism, that a team like Pitt can keep or a school like Pitt, a program like Pitt can keep a team together. It's not going to be 100%. It's not going to be every year. You're going to lose guys that you don't want to lose. But if you can keep the majority of the guys you want to keep and then use the portal for your own advantages to fill in and bulk up your roster, like I think there are ways to use this system to your advantage. And I think Pitt has done a decent job of that on both sides, football and basketball. So I don't know. I'm not as pessimistic, but this is just kind of what I do. I always try to find the ways that things will work out, at least as it relates to Pitt. Again, I need to apply this to like real life again. Let's see. Try and get through a couple more here. Atwood 409 says, how many years does Jeff Capel have left on his contract? I thought he was going to get them out of the basketball wilderness, but the peak for him is a fringe NCAA tournament team. He seems like a great person, but this is sadly not really working out for either party after 7 years. Well, your question is, how many years does Jeff Capel have left on his contract? 5. He's signed through 2029, 2030. So that's the answer to your question. As it relates to the long-term prospects, look, you're asking this question the morning, like less than 12 hours, less than 10 hours was when that question was posted yesterday, less than 10 hours after Pitt's third loss in a row. It's going to feel like everything sucks. Look, this is what happens. When a team loses a bunch of games in a row, it feels like they'll never win again. When a team wins a bunch of games in a row, it feels like they might not lose again. Remember last year, I think, or in the fall, before the Syracuse game, I posted, look, Pitt's going to lose a game at some point. And I got roasted for that. I got roasted for suggesting that Pitt would not go undefeated. They're like, what's wrong with you? Why would you say that? That's how it feels. When you lose games in a row, it feels like you might not win again. When you win games, a bunch of games in a row, it feels like you might not lose again. And intuitively, we all know that's not true. We all know they're going to win again. We all know they'll break this losing streak. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow. I don't know if it'll be next week. But they'll break this losing streak. It's just when you're in the middle of the losing streak, it doesn't feel like it. So, Capel's future, we'll see where we're at the end of the season. CB Brady, had a question from last week. I guess I didn't get to. Says, hi, Chris. When Pitt basketball announced they had signed Amsal Delich, I remember you being particularly exuberant about him. So far this season, has he lived up to your expectations? If not, how so? Well, he hasn't lived up to my expectations recently because he hasn't played in a game recently. I think when he's been out there, look, he pops up on the screen, perfect timing. When he's been out there, he's shown a lot of promise and looked pretty good. His potential has looked really good. But he just hasn't been able to play a lot lately. And he hasn't really been, I don't think he's gotten enough minutes or opportunities to really take off. And so his potential has lived up to my expectations. His performance hasn't, for a variety of reasons. All right, last one for this week, and it's ripped from the headlines here. This is maybe one of the biggest questions I think going around for Pitt fans and the Pitt basketball team right now. Berg B asks, what would be more concerning to you if true? 1, Jeff Capel realizing Cam Corhan isn't it, but continuing to play him due to personal promises, emotional attachment to him, etc., etc. Or 2, Jeff Capel continuing to play Cam Corhan because he actually still thinks he's their best option despite lots of evidence to the contrary. Feel free to offer other hypotheses as to the reasoning of his lineup management if there's another possible explanation. So this has been discussed a lot on the message board. This has been asked, this has been talked about, brought up, of why Cam Corrin plays? Were there promises made? Were the promises made last spring that, that you're going to be in the starting lineup, or you're going to play X amount of minutes? I don't think that's the case. I think there were opportunities presented of, look, if you come to Pitt, you're going to be able to play this, or you're going to be able to do that, or this opportunity exists for you. But I don't see promises and being beholden to promises. Like, I can't see Jeff Capel standing there watching Cam Corrin struggle and potentially cost the team an opportunity to win and saying, God, I really wish I could pull him, but last May I promised him I wasn't going to pull him. Like, I just don't see that. I don't see that happening. But the alternative to that, the alternative to some sort of backroom dealing cause, whether it's Jalen Lowe insisting on Cam Corrin playing or Capel promising Corrin or whatever, the alternative to that is that Capel still, as you said, that Capel still feels like Corrin is the best option. And that would be concerning in and of itself. I'm really withholding judgment here until we see this game tomorrow. In the, Wednesday night's game, in that loss at Florida State, we saw that Jeff Capel changed the starting lineup. He took Guillermo Diaz-Graham out, and I think that partially reflects on Guillermo, but I can't help but thinking that maybe reflects Capel wanting to get Guillermo into more of a rotation at center, because the first sub in that game was Guillermo coming in for Cam Corrin and playing the 5. Now, that didn't really play out the rest of the game. Guillermo played some minutes at the 4 and some minutes at the 5, and then no minutes in the second half for the second game in a row. But I'm really curious to see what happens tomorrow. Jorge Diaz-Graham has clearly made his case for playing more. And so how does that play out? Pitt's most effective lineups on Wednesday night at Florida State were 2 guards, 2 wings, and a center. So how does that play out? Do we get more of that tomorrow against Clemson? I'm really curious to see what kind of lineups we see on the court. Maybe the starting lineup changes, maybe it doesn't. But I want to see what those rotations look like. How do they move guys in and out? Who plays and who doesn't? Does Cam Corrin see his minutes go down? And does Guillermo Diaz-Graham get in there and maybe get a little bit more playing time? I'm really curious about it. Does Jorge get more playing time, which he certainly seems to have earned after his performance at Florida State? So tomorrow is going to be an interesting game. It's a huge game for Pitt. Obviously, Clemson is very good, and it's going to be a real challenge to beat the Tigers, but it would be a huge win if Pitt could pull it off. But it's also going to be very intriguing for a lot of other reasons, namely, particularly personnel and lineup decisions. I'm really interested to see what Jeff Capel decides to do and how the players respond. All right, that's all our questions for this week. Appreciate, we got some questions from last week, wrapped up some questions from this week. I appreciate everybody who contributed questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. If you want to be part of the conversation next week, you want to be part of the mailbag, you can go to Panther-Lair.com next, probably like Tuesday or so. We'll put up a post on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, and you can submit your question there. And we'll answer as many as we can in next week's mailbag. As always, we ask you to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. These daily morning Pitt videos are our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night. They won't always have Jerry DePaula and Stephen Thompson joining us like this week's show did, but we'll always have a good time with me and you and Jim Hammett and all our friends talking about Pitt sports. So thanks for watching these videos all week. We appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe. Enjoy the game tomorrow. Have a great weekend, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.